Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This episode of True Murder is brought to you by Audible, the world's leading name in digital audiobooks. In March 2009, Michael Jackson stood before the world press and announced that he would be doing a series of live concerts at London's Grand Concourse Stadium beginning in July. The shows would be called This Is It, and he referred to them as his final curtain call. But Michael would never make any of the dates. In June, the King of Pop died at his Los Angeles home. In 2004, a San Diego jury convicted Richard Tuite of fatally stabbing a 12-year-old Escondido girl named Stephanie Crowe. He was originally charged with murder in the case, but jurors rejected that and lowered the conviction to voluntary manslaughter when they decided he didn't act with malice, a necessary ingredient for a murder count. He was given a new trial and prosecuted for voluntary manslaughter due to double jeopardy attached to the murder charge. Tuite was convicted, however, by a second San Diego jury. Dr. Cyril H. Wecht is an expert in forensic medicine. His expertise has been utilized in high-profile cases involving the assassinations of both President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert Kennedy, the death of Elvis Presley, and the O.J. Simpson case and the John Benet Ramsey case. Donna Kaufman is an investigative journalist and co-author of 3 books with Dr. Wecht: A Question of Murder, which includes chapters about the deaths of Anna Nicole Smith and the trials of Richard Tuite, and From Crime Scene to Courtroom, 2011, examining the deaths of Michael Jackson, Caylee Anthony, and Rolling Stone Brian Jones. The books that we're going to be discussing this evening are Crime Scene to Courtroom and A Question of Murder, and, as I just spoke to Donna Kaufman, an update on final exams. Please welcome my special guests, Donna Kaufman and Dr. Cyril Wecht. Welcome back to the program, Donna Kaufman and Dr. Cyril Wecht.
Thank you. Welcome to you, and thank you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Cyril. Now, as I just alluded to, let's talk about final exams before we get into this incredible, we only have an hour or an hour and a half here, so we're going to be able to try to cover the incredible information that you have jam-packed in all of these books, but we're going to do Crime Scene to Courtroom and A Question of Murder and discuss particular cases that appear in both those books. But as you said, maybe you can go ahead, or whoever wants to go ahead, give us the update on the latest book when I interviewed you in the fall, Final Exams. Tell us what this latest update is.
Okay, may I do that, Cyril?
Please, Donna, please.
Okay, we touched on this in our initial interview with you, Dan, and we have a chapter in Final Exam called The Willing Victim, and it's about a guru, self-help guru, named Jeffrey Locker, who lived in the Tony part of Manhattan, and a 52-year-old white guy who drove to the black part of town, uptown in Manhattan, called Harlem, and he encountered a man he had never seen before named Kenneth Miner, 36-year-old guy, and convinced this guy to kill him. And the guy said, well, there's a bridge right there. Why don't you just jump off the bridge? No, that wouldn't do, because the guy's finances were hitting the skids, and he needed to make it look like murder. So he gave this 36-year-old man, black man, a bunch of money and said, here, you can have anything in the car. Just here's something to choke me with. tie my hands behind my back, and then try to strangle me. Well, the cord broke, and then he said, okay, in the glove box right there, there's a knife. Now hold that knife against the steering wheel, and I will plunge myself into it. And the guy, of course, this is over several hours of time, the guy's going, why would I do this? And he says, because, I'm going to find some other guy to do it. I am going out tonight, and that's it. My family is cool with this, and they all know I'm worth more dead than alive. So if not you, then someone else. So the guy says, okay, fine. So he puts the knife against the steering wheel, and the Jeffrey Locker impales himself 6 times on it, and they pick up this guy. The cops pick up this guy really quickly and arrest him, and he tells them the story, and they go, yeah, sure, we've never heard of such a thing. Yeah, aren't you the Harlem Kevorkian? Ha, ha, ha. And then, in the course of going to trial, the prosecutor is called by someone who says, hey, that guy you have on trial? Well, I got to tell you, this guru came to me and said the same thing. I took his money and split. I said I was going to get a gun. But this guy was definitely shopping for someone to murder him. So that kind of changed everything. Now they started arguing. The defense attorney, a wonderful attorney named Daniel Gotlin, started saying, this is not murder. This is, if anything, assisted suicide. Now, the guy who committed the crime was a drug addict, and he was culpable for doing, first-class stupidity for sure. And he knows he has to go to jail. But he doesn't. He ended up getting a 25-year to life sentence on first-degree murder. And I'm going to let Dr. Weck talk about what he testified to and what specifically the judge, who was a judge who basically had a habit of telling defendants, I know that this is all you're supposed to get sentenced, but I'm going to add time to your sentence. So she was a real hard-nosed judge. So what she did not allow Dr. Weck to present to the jury has resulted in this defendant, soon to get a new trial. And we'll know in April. There's a new grand jury. They're quabbling about what are the new sentence possibilities. But, Dr. Weck, please explain the wounds.
Well, I wanted to add something first. Donna, you alluded to it, but I'm not sure it's clear to Dan's listeners that the reason Locker was going to kill himself because of his financial problems, which were going to be then taken care of by about, $13 million of life insurance.
Exactly.
Which he had taken out, Dan, double indemnity for homicide, and it became quite clear, as Donna has mentioned, that the family knew about this. The 2 detectives that went to the house to tell this wife and her 2 teenage kids that the husband father had been murdered, which is what they firmly believed at that time. They got about as much reaction as if they had said, by the way, your husband has a flat tire down a block and he needs you to come down and drive him home. That was the reaction that they got from these people. And they walked out.
And during the trial, all these emails came out where it seemed very, very clear that the family knew what was going on.
Yeah, there is no question because, Dan, a couple policies which have been paid have been rescinded, and money, I believe, has now been paid back. And most of the policies which had not been paid have all been withdrawn. And to my knowledge, there's no attempt, there would not be any attempt by the widow, because she's lucky, and this is not the purpose of our writing about this or talking about it, but she is darn lucky not to have been charged with criminal conspiracy, fraudulent conspiracy, which she could well have been charged with, and that's a significant felony. So she's not going to be doing anything. All right, so back now to the scenario. You hold the night, and I played this out for the national television program with my assistant. I was Mr. Locker sitting behind the wheel, and my assistant was Kenneth Miner sitting to my right in the front seat passenger. And you hold the knife with the base of the knife against the center of the steering wheel, with the pointed portion facing just straight outward. And Locker, who is now firmly committed to committing suicide, he lunges forward. And people say, well, how can you do that? Well, I showed. And once you do it, once you have that forward lunging motion, it's the simplest thing in the world to simply do it again. And also, as I pointed out, all of the points of entry, of penetration, were within a tight range. And I wanted to show that if you are being stabbed to death in a homicidal attack, obviously you're going to do everything you can to get out of the way. So the knife wounds in such a situation would be scattered here and there in different directions and different topographic locations on the body. These were clustered quite close together and essentially a clear-cut pattern depicting that indeed Locker kept lunging directly into the knife. And as Donna says, none of this was allowed. You know, I've been doing consultations and work as a forensic pathologist for 52 years, and, you know, I never grade, or, you know, this is the worst, this is the third worst, the fifth best, or whatever, but I do want to emphasize the point that Donna made. This judge was one of the most biased judges I have ever encountered, and I hope then, as I said to Dan Gottland recently, congratulating him on getting this retrial and negotiating courageously and firmly for a low-level involuntary manslaughter, which is what it should be. Assisted suicide is not legally recognized, and that's the law, and you can't just walk away no matter what your intentions are. So everybody realizes that. But I said to Dan Gottland, I sure hope that you get a different judge, and I would think that is going to be the case. It's a fascinating case, once in a lifetime kind of a case, bizarre when you first hear about it, which the detectives were subjected to initially. And then you say, yeah, tell me another one. But they came to realize, and by the way, there was no argument at all about this being a scenario orchestrated by Locker. That was no longer in contention. But they were arguing, the prosecution, that this is still first-degree murder, and I, to this day, don't understand. But this is, of course, the zeal and the intense dedication, I call it zealotry and even fanaticism, that one encounters with prosecutors throughout the United States. Not at all rare to have encountered this.
Well, and you can ask yourself, was there a racial component in the judge's mind that she just didn't like this guy? Because was there a racial component in the mind of this victim who went to Harlem to find a poor, drugged-out black man that he thought would be the person to do this? He didn't drive to, any other part of town.
Yeah, but
what,
there may well be, Donna, but
The thing is, we're really arguing the point is that you believe that you had valid, and it sounds credible to me, and based on your credibility and your reputation and your experience, that what was the reason for disallowing you to present your evidence at trial, and then I'm curious, what is the basis for the retrial now? Not just that the sentence was inappropriate.
I testified. Please understand that, and I was permitted to discuss some of the things I've talked with you this evening, Dan. But the demonstration to which I referred a little bit ago, that I showed clearly on television,
48 hours.
That was not allowed, and that you have to see. I did that with an actual. It was a rubber knife. Hard plastic, a collapsible knife, and I showed with my hands tied behind my back, and my assistant holding the knife, that you just simply lunge forward with force. I talked about and explained things getting into question of how much would it hurt and what does it take to, what kind of force does it require, and those are the things that one must see really, especially a juror, to understand, well, gee, how can this be done? Because I believe that 9 out of 10 people, perhaps even listening tonight, are saying BS and not believing what Don and I are saying here. But I want to make it clear, and I'm repeating myself, I know that this was not, the prosecution fully accepted this scenario. They did not say that Kenneth Minor stabbed him and murdered him. They accepted the scenario, but what they were saying was that it still constituted murder. So believe me, the scenario was accepted, but could not be fully explained because it was not permitted to be demonstrated to the jury.
And the pathologist on the other side, who actually did the initial autopsy, had to concede that if someone was struggling to get away from a knife attack, the wounds would be torn and the skin shredded, and there would be physical proof of that just as you're looking at the body on the morgue table. It would be very clear. But what Cyril Dr. Wecht had, was the knife wounds going in very cleanly, no tearing. So, that was a very important point.
But if they still think it's murder by definition, and they present that to the jury and they are convincing and have a compelling argument, or they are convincing, we'll put it that way, to juries, then they say that by definition it's a murder because there's planning.
Well, the last I heard, Dan, from Dan Gotlin, who told Donna and me that it's already agreed that it's going to be a manslaughter. There are different levels of manslaughter that play out in terms of the years of incarceration, and there is an offer already made to Attorney Gotlin that some people might accept, but Gotlin, and obviously his client, because it's up to the client, not the attorney, has rejected it, and I commend him and admire his courage. They're saying that it's the lower level of involuntary manslaughter, which would permit him to be getting out of jail within a relatively short time, a few years or so on. Look, assisted suicide is not recognized anywhere in this country except a couple of states, and that's by physician-assisted suicide. So we are not arguing that this should be forgiven or ignored. We understand that, and whatever anybody may think, that's a discussion for another day, morally, ethically, etc. But what we're saying is that in this case, where you have proof that is not being challenged by the prosecution, that this was indeed a suicide, and that you have somebody physically assisting, then, especially now with the case having been sent back for retrial, just walk away with it, walk away from it. And by the way, I can't help but add, one would think that New York City, the courts with the district attorney's office and the homicide detectives have enough serious crimes to deal with instead of making this their life work. This 36-year-old poor African-American guy and so on, who, by the way, is a very intelligent guy. You should see that interview, listen to him talk. He doesn't whine or he doesn't make up excuses or so on. He understands what he did and so on. For them to be making this into a cause célèbre is simply inexplicable.
And by the way, the judge, there was a 3-panel judge that heard the evidence of the new trial, and they unanimously agreed.
Well, that's good news then. Then you're vilified here in this, or vindicated, I should say.
Yeah. Such a... We're both. We get both of them.
Both at the same time, yes. How can that be? How can that be? Yes. So let's get to this Tuite case, because this is a fascinating case that I know that I was not aware of, and so I'm pretty positive that a lot of the audience won't be. And so this is a fascinating story. As I spoke with Donna beforehand, Dr. Searle, that what I noted about this case was that it demonstrates a lot of things that are wrong with the judicial system, from malfeasance by the police to false confessions to an FBI agent acting inappropriately given the evidence that she became aware of, and for all of the elements of this, it clearly demonstrates the sometimes miscarriage of justice that occurs in our courts. Let's get right to giving us a background about the victim, Stephanie Crowe. Maybe you can start off with this, Donna. Okay,
I'd be happy to. This is from our first book, A Question Murder, as you said, Dan. Stephanie Crowe was 12 years old. She lived with her family, an older brother, younger sister, their parents, and the grandma who was there getting cancer treatment in a suburb of San Diego. They were caretakers on a very rural property that was on a cul-de-sac. And on the night of January 20th, 1998, Stephanie was found the next morning in her hallway of her bedroom, dead of stab wounds. She had been stabbed in her bed through her blanket, her bedclothes, her sheets, blanket, comforter. And she crawled to the hallway for help, and she died in the hallway, and they found her the next morning. So the police immediately zeroed in on the brother, and he had two friends, the brother, and this is reminiscent of the West Memphis Three, was a kid who dressed in black, and he drew dark things. He was 14. So they took the three boys, and they said, we think you guys did this. And for 40 hours, without the parents' knowledge, without any of the permissions, without any lawyer in the room, these boys were brutally questioned until they confessed. Two of the three confessed. And this is a case, by the way, that they teach now in law schools. And right. So as the boys were going to trial, and they were in juvenile hall for a while awaiting that, one of the defense attorneys said, wait a minute, look at this clothing from a homeless guy who was found that night, and it has blood drops on it, and they match Stephanie. How did that happen? So all of a sudden, the attention started going to a man named Richard Tuite, who is now 44, so he was, in his 20s, I guess, then. And he was a Charles Manson lookalike that grew up in that area and was was seen in that cul-de-sac that night screaming at the top of his lungs for an old girlfriend who turns out looked just like Stephanie. And he was breaking into people's houses. One man found him in his living room, and he said, where's Stephanie? I want to kill her. And people kept calling the police and saying there's this weird loony who seems to be on drugs screaming for someone, come and help us. And a cop came out, saw nothing, but saw the Crowe family laundry room door close, and then thought, well, I could check it out, or I could go to dinner. I'll go to dinner. So, but the cops knew who this guy was, and so they picked him up the next day and said, was that you? And he said, no. And they said, give us your clothes anyway, and they gave him new clothes. And so they tested those clothes, found her blood on it, but the cops said, oh, he's too discombobulated. He couldn't have done this. He's a meth head. He's a drug addict. Forget it. Well, there was a trial of this guy, and in 2004, he was convicted, and then there was a lawsuit from the families of the three boys, And Dr. Weck can explain what he did in that and how he was involved in that. There was a lawsuit that ended up paying the families, the Crowe family, $7.25 million, and one of the other boys $4 million. And everyone thought everything is great. Now finally justice is righted. This guy's in jail because you know what? It turned out that he had a long history of attacking women and attacking other people with a knife. And he poured, in one case, he pulled clothing over a guy's head and stabbed him through the clothing. So it was just obvious this guy was the person who did this. And yet there was a trial this year. He got through the Innocence Project of California. They gave him a new trial based on, I don't understand what. It was ridiculous why they gave it to him, but they overturned his conviction, and then they did a new trial, and he was acquitted. And the reason he was acquitted is because in the original trial, which went on for months and months and had hundreds of witnesses, the jury got the full picture of who he was and what the crime was about. In the new trial, they thought, who needs witnesses? Look at this guy. He's crazy. Everyone's going to know he's a crazy head. And yet his defense attorney cleaned him up. He looked like a young preppy. He looked innocent and scared. And they did not bring in any of the witnesses, including Dr. Wecht, and they just shortchanged the jury. So the jury had no choice but to let him go because the evidence was not presented. So I will shut up now and let Dr. Wecht talk about the nature of the injuries that he saw and his part in this.
Well, let me go back to the charges brought against the boys. Donna has explained that quite clearly, but it deserves a little bit of emphasis because, again, I'm always thinking of the average person on the street. On average, it could be a PhD nuclear physicist. I don't mean to insult anybody, but I'm people who are not cognizant of the law, and more specifically, who do not know about prosecutorial bias and prejudice and police tactics. They can get away with anything. People think, there's justice and so on. Okay. And the other thing that people think is that, man, if I didn't kill anybody, I didn't commit any crime, there's no way in the world you're ever going to get me to admit something. And you go 40 hours with little or no sleep. You are a 14-year-old boy. I think one of the other boys, maybe the other two boys were 15. Mm-hmm. And you have no lawyer. You have no parent. You're being interrogated. And then, and this is a matter of record, and then they were told, look, you just tell us what happened, and you have no criminal record, not going to be so bad. You go to jail, man. You know what happens to young boys like you in jail? You'll be raped every single day you're in jail. I want people to think about this and so on. And they don't, and the promises or the assurances and so on, that's the way the game is played, and it is permissible. It is permissible. I want to emphasize that for people to understand how rotten the game is. So the second point I want to make is Donna just jumped into the trial of Tuite. What she did not mention is that the San Diego authorities, district attorney, police, at all refused to budge. It required the intervention of the Attorney General of the state of California to intercede and to order that the charges be dropped against the boys, and then, because of the excellent work done by one of the women attorneys who was appointed and court appointed to represent one of the boys, the work that she did in uncovering the existence of this guy Tuite and so on. So I want people to understand that. That's how then there came to be the trial of Tuite. I was involved later in the lawsuit to which Donna referred, in the family's lawsuit against them, the San Diego authorities, going back against them for false imprisonment, etc. That is what led to the huge amounts of money that were paid and I believe quite properly so, to a couple of the boys, I don't know about the third boy, for what had been done to them. And despite that, and one other thing, Donna, you forgot to mention, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 judges at 2 different times, formally and officially, from the bench, ruled and stated for the record that these boys are innocent and did not commit any crime. That is a matter of official adjudication and by 2 judges, and yet the basis for the jurors coming to a conclusion in this recently concluded second trial of a couple months or so ago, obviously the basis was not only Tuite didn't do it, but, that jury, you think they were back there, there's no way they were going to let him walk unless in their minds they knew, quotation marks, they knew who did it. And who did it? The 3 boys. So that jury is the second jury from hell, as I put it, or from a distant planet. The first one having been the Caylee, Casey Anthony case. That was the number 1 jury that will go down in history as a jury from a distant planet. And this one goes down, in my book, as the second jury from a distant planet, that despite all of this, despite everything I've told you, as a matter of record, that this jury, they and their consummate, ultimate wisdom, their great sagacity, omniscience, decided that Tuite is Mr. Innocent, and the 3 boys, although, that's not part of the verdict, of course, but that obviously is the basis for their reasoning. Otherwise, there's no way in the world they would have come back in with a vote of acquittal. So this is a monster case. My involvement had to do with the stab wounds, the location of the body, and those kinds of specific forensic pathology aspects which had not been properly dealt with and which had to be explained to the jury, and that was accomplished. There's been a reference to the FBI, and you should know that one of the top FBI agents, and Donna can elucidate on this, came in and lambasted the woman FBI agent who had gone along with the cops and who was still sticking with them to the scenario involving the 3 boys. And that, by the way, Donna, was the basis for the trial. The appellate court in California said that the trial judge had not afforded the defense the appropriate opportunity to get into that whole business with the FBI agents, the disparity, disagreement between them, and did not allow the testimony to come forward from the woman FBI agent. That's my understanding. But that's a technicality. The point is that there came to be the retrial, and the decision that I referred to is what emanated therefrom.
Well,
right.
I'm a little confused.
One thing, which is the body, as we make clear in our books all the time, the body talks to someone who knows what he's looking at, like Dr. Wecht, who has 56,000 cases. He knows what he's seen. And in Stephanie's case, you can look at the stab wounds and determine with a high degree of probability what kind of a knife was used on her. Well, the murder weapon was never found, but one of the boys happened to have a Best Defense brand knife, and it did not match the wounds in Stephanie. So there's that. And then just about the FBI thing. You I don't know in Canada, but in America there's a show on CBS called Criminal Minds.
Oh, yes.
About the profiling division, the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI, which is the elite of the elite. They're the brainiacs who look into victimology and who is likely to have committed such a crime. It's just a great show. It's probably in its 5th season now. The person who headed that unit was a woman named Mary Ellen O'Toole, now retired. She, for some reason, got involved in the civil case, and if you see Criminal Minds, they never touch civil cases because they're always trying to put a criminal behind bars. That's why it's called that. She got involved in the boys did this, and she was going to help the civil case. When she testified, saying no, the boys did this, Richard Tuite was too discombobulated to do it. Well, there's another FBI agent who retired from that unit named Greg McCrary. He's just a wonderful guy and has 26 years of experience. And he looked into this and said, well, wait a minute, how can you ignore this guy's previous how can you ignore the fact that he has a habit of doing this kind of stabbing and this kind of demented victimology? Plus, he looked through Stephanie's window as she was going to bed, and then he thought that was the girl he was looking for and threatening to kill. Plus, 2 days after the event, he was on a bus and saw a 12 and 13-year-old girl and said, are you Stephanie, or are you, Tracy, his girlfriend, because I want to kill you. And plus, he's so canny, this guy, that when he was awaiting trial, Tuite, not the FBI agent, he slipped out of his handcuffs by putting mayonnaise from a sandwich on his wrist, slipped out of his handcuffs, hopped on a bus, and was across town for several hours before they found him. So he turns on the crazy act when he has to, but it's not there all the time. He is a drug addict and he has mental issues, but he also knows how to game the system. So what you would think, this became a battle between the two FBI profilers, and when they were going to retry, I called the attorney who was going to prosecute in Sacramento, which is our state capital, and I said, hey, I want you to know about our book. Let me send you our book and show you the work that Dr. Weck did on this, and he is willing to come back and testify for you. He's on the other coast, so you have to fly him in, but he won't charge you because he feels so strongly about this case. And Greg McCrary, who also felt strongly about it, also called and said, I'm available to testify. I won't charge you. You just pay for my airfare because I want to see that this guy stays behind prison. And they didn't call either of them, and they basically told me, oh, well, we know what we're doing with this case. And I said, I know, maybe this is obvious, but have you found the guy that he stabbed before, that he put in the hospital, that several years ago? And they said, well, it's a homeless guy. We don't know where he is. I said, but he went to the hospital. There was a police report. You know who his family is. How can you not call this guy and say this is the same? And the attorney basically told me, don't worry, lady, we'll take care of our prosecution. Well, now the killer is walking the streets, or he soon will be when he gets out of parole custody. And not only that, he can sue the state of California for wrongful imprisonment and make up to $300,000 in doing so.
Incredible. Let me ask one question here, because you pointed this out, and to me, a lot of that evidence that you've provided is not going to be that compelling, compared to the argument that you make that O'Toole ignored the blood evidence, meaning Stephanie Crowe's blood, on his clothing. Now, I don't know how you get around explaining that. That's a pretty implausible and incredible explanation.
What they said, Dan, is an excellent point, a marvelous question, obviously. The answer was, Dan, that it just got contaminated, that somehow Tuite's shirt, when it was being photographed at the crime lab or whatever, somehow blood from Stephanie Crowe, which then, according to the defense theory, remember, keep in mind that Tuite wasn't there. Tuite had nothing to do with it. How Stephanie Crowe's blood gets onto Tuite's T-shirt through contamination. I can understand contamination. We all can. You don't have to be a criminalist to understand that. If you got people working the scene, people in the laboratory, how Crowe's blood gets onto Tuite's T-shirt, with him in there. That's an answer.
T-shirt and sweatshirt.
Yeah, and well, so no, I can't give you an answer because I don't know what the answer is.
And also his pockets. They photographed the contents of his pockets before they took them. They said, okay, you can take good stuff back. They didn't fingerprint the contents, but they were knickknacks taken from the Crowe home.
Yes, and other things that are consistent with what she would have in her home, a particular specific type of gum, I believe, and a chocolate bar. So some really good circumstantial evidence that corroborates a lot of other evidence. So, yeah, certainly. Now the thing is, that you put this blame on. Now, I still don't understand why, in appeal, the courts felt that because the defense didn't have the right to. I don't understand, and I think the audience won't understand. So maybe you can further explain how it came to be the right of the perpetrator, the killer, to have the cross-examination of the FBI agents, and that was important, at least it seemed in the decision. So explain a little bit more about how that worked in terms of, you say, the disparity between the conclusions between the two FBI agents, and you said O'Toole had concluded that was an insider job, and of course had excluded Tuite because he said disorganized, discombobulated, but then as an alternative said, but this is an inside job, which clearly pointed to the three boys.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about the issue.
She wrote that into a report that she filed in court. Greg McCrary read that report and hit the ceiling saying, this is a civil case. What is she doing here? And he wrote a letter to his colleagues, and they're with some kind of association of former profilers and FBI agents. So he wrote a letter and said, I want you to know what happened here. And she found out about the letter, and she was furious that he wrote a nasty letter about her, in her opinion. And that it was on that basis that they got the retrial, so that they could call them both again and let the jury hear both sides. And you know who they called? Neither of them. So the whole reason for doing the retrial was ignored.
Oh, by the way, Dan, I forgot to mention something else that is absolutely, if it weren't such a serious matter, it would be something, I'm smiling as I say this. The two other boys, friends of Stephanie's brother, lived, you ready for this, miles away. Neither one of them drives or drove a car. In order to get there in that limited time period, in the middle of the night, they would have had to have walked miles down to the Crowe home, gone in, committed the murder, walked back, and the next morning, and this is testified to not by the boys but by the teachers at the school, the boys had a significant examination the first thing in the morning, and both of them got a perfect score, an A or whatever. They creamed the test. So they did all of this in the middle of the night, walking down there, committing the murder, walking back, studying for. The teacher said there's no way that they could have performed as they did on that test without some serious studying. This is testimony on the record from one of the teachers, not presented in the trial, but as part of the overall background. So I just wanted to throw that in also, how the police reached out for these three boys.
Now, the big, the injustice here is that the killer walks free, but also that these three kids were subjected, and the one, Michael, I believe, or maybe it was Aaron or Joshua, I'm not sure which one of them, you said they suffered like a nervous breakdown in this 40 hours. A couple of them, just really broke down in the questioning.
Yeah.
How did the police...
The new jury, in lieu of giving them witnesses like Dr. Wecht and the FBI agents and other forensic, what the jury had to do was watch 40 hours of their taped confessions. So that's what the jury watched, and they saw the brutality, and the jurors said, "Oh, that was just awful. I can't believe they did that." But who else do you blame? A defense attorney has to say, "My guy didn't do it because someone else did," and we know who that was.
But the thing is that, what you demonstrate, and again, I'm going to get this so that the audience understands this, is that false confessions, not everyone understands. And when you hear, I'm recanting my confession, there's a lot of people that do that. Serial killers do it. A lot of people have done this. But we can see an impressionable youth, and then again, with no legal representation, not their parents there, not any legal counsel there, and then planting ideas. You do a good job of telling how they actually do this by saying, listen, you're going to get raped, but we can put you in special custody now as long as you give us this information.
That's it.
And you must have done it because we give you this test, and this test is infallible, and you failed. So,
and then they also lie too, Dan. They also lie. They tell, and this is another game that is played down in the United States with two or more people involved, and they're permitted to do this. By the way, they are permitted legally to do this. To say to A that B has already confessed, and he's dumping it on you, Mr. A, and so you better tell us the true story to save your neck, baby, or you're going up and Mr. B's walking out of here free, or maybe with 1 year. Okay, so I just want people to understand. What do you think the psychology of all that is? You think these are noble, courageous people? And most of these people are usually, they're not brilliant people, and they're not mature adults, as in this case quite often. And so if anybody is having a difficult time understanding this, go and talk to a forensic psychologist or a psychiatrist, and he or she will explain it to you mighty fast as to how the human mind works and how the emotions and inner concerns begin to take over, and you'll confess to anything, baby. Just let me get out of here. Let me get home, and it'll all be over. And I want to get a little sleep. I just want to get into my bed. I want to get something to eat, and so it'll be over and done with. It's not hard to achieve this when you have these kinds of tactics at play.
Let me ask two questions because I'm confused on this, and I think it's important to explain this story. You say that Treadwell and the other boy lived miles away, and was implausible that they could have come and assisted him. What was the basis? Again, evidence, they needed to have some evidence, but what kind of evidence did they have other than the 14-year-old didn't show the level of remorse as the other members of the family went due to the murder, given the murder itself? What included these boys other than the one liked swords and knives? But how do they make this leap?
The one who liked the swords and knives had this best defense knife.
By the way, that's a commercial name. Explain that. Best Defense.
Right, that's the brand name.
That's a brand name. Best knife. Defense. Yeah.
No, but how did the police? How did the police go
had borrowed it and had it under his mattress.
Yeah, but Dan's asking Donna. Dan's asking, how did the police come to these two other boys initially?
In the first place.
Do you know?
Well, because they found. I guess he was saying, I was talking to my friends on the phone, and so they got search warrants.
Okay.
They found under one of the boys' mattresses that knife, and they went, aha, the murder weapon. They took the knife to the lab. They took it apart. They found no blood, no DNA, nothing from Stephanie on it. And you'd think that, well, that's the end of that. But no, that was the that was.
Oh, Dan, yeah, another part of the answer, Dan, to your question is, yes, I forgot this. Don, I believe I'm right. In fact, when I read it recently, I was reminded. Dan, what the police concluded, they and their investigative unit, was that based upon the way in which the overlying quilt or blanket had been penetrated repeatedly, etc., and the wounds inflicted on the young girl, that it would have required two people. One would have had to have one would have had to have held that blanket or quilt in place while the other did the stabbing. So that's how they reached out for a second person, and then the third person was considered to be a lookout to make sure that no attention was brought to the parents in the adjacent bedroom and so on. So that's the way that their scenario evolved.
Right.
Wow, incredible. Now the other thing that I don't understand fully, and I think the audience might be questioning this too. We have the defense attorney that notices blood on the clothing of someone that has been looked at during this murder investigation, but of course has been excluded as a suspect because they say he couldn't have done this. How
he hadn't
explain
been
to us
at that time yet.
but explain to us how the defense attorney. Explain to us the process where the defense attorney sees something that someone else doesn't see, or I don't understand how.
Donna,
it was blood drops on a red shirt, so they didn't even bother testing it. They didn't see it.
No, but I think what Dan's asking is how do they come to it, and how do they? And my recollection is that the defense attorney, and she was a darn good attorney, with her extensive investigation, came to learn about this man who was going around, as Donna has explained, in the neighborhood and so on. She then tracked him. He had been picked up for something totally unrelated, and she then pursued it and got into the analysis, examination, investigation of this guy, she not knowing anything about him at that point, but began to say, hey, here's this guy that was in the neighborhood doing what Donna explained and so on. And then she goes and she follows through, and in her follow-up, she learns about his clothing, and she learns about bloodstain on his shirt. She has the shirt submitted to her own DNA specialist who identifies Stephanie Crowe's blood on the shirt that was done by an outside DNA specialist.
Mm-hmm.
So the police didn't see the blood, or they didn't analyze
they saw the blood, but they never tested it.
Yeah,
wow.
They didn't care.
Wow.
They never tested it.
Yeah, and their motive, and the loose motive is that Michael was jealous of his sister.
Right.
And how on earth these other boys got involved. Wow.
Well, that's why the families have $11 million, today. But I'm sure they would all rather have Stephanie back. You know, she was truly the one lost in the shuffle. And,
or at least the killer behind bars.
Yeah, right. At least, you're right, Dan, that's a good way. At least the killer behind bars. Can you just try to imagine how that family feels? The girl is gone, this lovely, beautiful 12-year-old girl, and the killer is out free, and the blame, although no longer officially anything to worry about, but the blame is out there among their friends, acquaintances, the community, wherever they may be, that, you know what, those boys really did it and got away with it. Can you imagine? It's a triple whammy that they have to live with for the rest of their lives. You can take the money and throw it into the ocean. Money does not take care of those things.
Well, absolutely, and it's just a miscarriage of justice. And a fine example of this story as well is that very fact. How can they get a false confession, and how zealous are prosecutors? And then some. You say they didn't present a case at all in the next trial. They were overconfident for no reason. Given the miscarriage of justice and these innocent people and their traumatic experiences in the court system, they still didn't feel compelled to grab justice by the horns here and
it's
right
unbelievable.
the evident wrong.
Not because it was me or an excellent retired FBI agent like Greg McCurry. I mean, it could have been Jones and Smith. I don't say this in an egotistical way, but you have a forensic pathologist and a top FBI agent who have worked the case, who have examined it, who are prepared to testify at no cost, $1,000 airfare, whatever the hell it would be, and so on, and you don't call upon two experts like that in this kind of a case? It's legal malpractice is what it is. It's legal malpractice. Just like a doctor committing medical malpractice, this was legal malpractice that resulted in this abomination.
And given too that the taxpayer in this budget crunch kind of society economy that we're in, that this clown will certainly have the right to be able to sue the state and be able to recover $300,000 is beyond a slap in the face to the family especially, but every taxpayer that invests so much in this judicial system to see this miscarriage of justice from bottom on up.
And the paradox, the irony is, talking about the taxpayers, that very likely a key reason that the prosecution did not reach out and handle this case was because they were concerned about their budget. I don't know this, but I would be willing, because I don't think they wanted this guy to go free. Nobody's thinking or suggesting that. No. Or that they're stupid and ignorant. So you got to say, well, why? Why? Because one, as Donna pointed out, they were cocky and complacent, and what the hell, it's a slam dunk. And two, we're not going to spend any time, effort, and money, and let's get it over with. And this is the result. Wow,
incredible story, Richard Tuite. Now we are running out of time, but if you can hang around a little bit, let's explore the another book from Courtroom. Another one of your books.
I'll have to leave in a short while because I have an incoming call from attorneys, interestingly from California too, on a big deposition that I'm doing tomorrow on a police-related death case. Maybe we'll talk about another time about police chokehold and tasers and the whole gamut. Wow. So I apologize, but I promised them that I would be available. But I'm sure Donna would be loved, and I do apologize to you, Dan, and I want you to know that believe me, if I could change it, but I can't because it's all booked. But I want to thank you, if I may just take my last minute here, so much for your courtesy and graciousness and having us on and permitting us to talk. I know that both Donna and I are a bit loquacious, to put it in a benign, gentle fashion. I can think of other descriptive words that might be more apt. But thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. So I shall say goodnight to you and Donna and to all your listeners. And I'm sure Donna will regale you with some other wonderful stories and cases that we've written about and so on. So thank you very much, Donna. Nice being with you again as always.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dr. Wecht, and it has been my pleasure, and like usual, it is my pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you very much.
I'll look forward to the next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
And then there was one.
Yes. Yes. So thank you for remaining on the line here so we can go a little bit longer, and because we haven't touched on Michael Jackson, and I really didn't know much about this story. I didn't follow it too much other than what everybody else thinks they know about the doctor and his involvement. But we don't know the story of Dr. Cyril Wecht's involvement in this and your involvement in this as well in terms of just doing the investigative work. So from crime scene to courtroom, this is the book that this occurs in the Michael Jackson chapter, if I'm correct.
Right.
And so let's talk about...
Which also has Casey Anthony in it. We mentioned that earlier, and some other cases. There are like 5 cases in that one, and Casey Anthony is a definite... we both had a lot to do with that case as well. But Michael Jackson, as in my daytime job, I am a freelance investigative journalist for the American tabloids. So the word Michael Jackson has been in my vocabulary since his hair caught on fire in 1984 when we first started covering him. And
right.
that was when he first started becoming addicted to drugs. Everyone knew it. So I had worked on him with all the other colleagues there. Just everything that kind of came up in the news I was involved with in some way, including his trial for child molestation, including the Bubbles the Chimp chapter and his sleeping in the oxygen chamber. I mean, the whole Jackson episode, his whole lifestyle, which we get into in our book a lot. It's not just about how he died; it's about how he lived. It's just something that a fiction writer would make up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, tell us about the last. What I did in the introduction was talk about this impending concert that everyone was looking forward to. In fact, there was the rehearsal concert that was eventually released and to fans worldwide, and I have a copy of that, and it's incredible.
Right.
So the world was anticipating this magnificent concert series with Michael Jackson. Tell us about his health and the kind of care that he was under. He was with the care of Dr. Conrad Murray, but he'd only been with him a short period of time. So tell us about this relationship and what was Michael's state of health at that time.
Well, Michael had been in failing health for a long time, and if you look at that concert footage, notice how in the course of a song his costumes change because it's edited by a wonderful team of magicians that used a lot of footage from different rehearsals, put them together to cover up when he had to stop, when he had to take a breath, when he couldn't go on. They Frankensteined this concert footage with little bits from here, little bits from there, coverage of other musicians. So he could barely get through a song. I know that
Wow.
because I know some of the people who were involved in the making of, in capturing his performance during that time. The main thing to know about Michael Jackson is he was so broke. He had made a lot of money in his life, but boy, did he spend it. He not just on lawyers to get him out of and payoffs to young boys, which there were a lot, but also just in his lifestyle. I mean, we've all seen that Martin Bashir thing where he goes where he's in Las Vegas and he goes into a store and he says, "I want one of that, I want a painting, I want that, blah blah blah, $6 million, put it on my credit card," and then what you don't find out is, no, his credit card was turned down, because but that was his thing, just spending. He had these 3 children, and he would bring them to different parts of the world, from Bahrain to Ireland, not because he wanted to protect the children or expose them to other worlds, but because the doctors here were clamping down on how much drugs that he was able to get at any one time. And he, along with Anna Nicole and many other people who die of drug addiction, had any number of phony names that he would get prescriptions filled under. And, even you can only play that game for so long. So he was always searching for the next place to go where he could get doctors who would be enamored with his notoriety and give him all sorts of prescription drugs.
Wow. Now, what did he need the prescription drugs for, or at least that was the rationale for them? What was the basis for needing all these painkillers?
Well, he had trouble sleeping. He was also in a lot of pain because, there were physical things going on with him, and people thought that he had lupus at one point. He did not. But he had some physical woes, and he wasn't that healthy a guy. But his real problem was that he was addicted to painkillers, and when you're addicted, you just can't say, okay, I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm not going to do that. His family had on several occasions taken him aside and done, kind of interventions, and he just wouldn't go for any of it. And if you cross someone like him or Anna Nicole Smith, they will just X you out of their lives. So the only people that really could talk to him were his mother, Diana Ross, Oprah, and people who were really, really above him in the position, who he really respected. And when all those people tried to talk to him, he still said no. Lisa Marie Presley tried to convince him to go straight. He dumped her. So he had very few people who would not challenge him. But in his last several months, the problem was sleeping, and he couldn't have a deep sleep. And part of that was because he was on the third floor of this mansion in Beverly Hills. He insisted on keeping it almost 100 degrees. He insisted his portion of the mansion, he would only be able to sleep if the television was on and music tracks were playing at the same time, and he had a laptop in his bed that played cartoons. He needed this kind of audio stimulation and visual stimulation, and he drank something like 15 Red Bulls a day. So, of course, that's going to keep you from sleeping. And he couldn't get a good night's sleep, but his doctors, because he had tons of plastic surgery over the years, his doctors noticed when he was having plastic surgery, they would give him propofol, which put him into, it's a Diprovan is the name of the drug, propofol is the brand name, and it's an injectable thing that you put in an IV, and it puts you into a coma-like condition, and as soon as it clears from your system, which is very quick, a little couple-inch long container of it that you would put into an IV lasts 15 minutes. So, once you're finished with that, you come right awake. So he wanted that coma-like state, which is not really sleep. It's not REM sleep. It's not healthy sleep. But he had cowed a number of doctors into doing that. So then he goes to London because his financial advisors say, you have to do these concerts. This is your last chance. This is it. And if you do these concerts, you'll reverse all the problems. You'll stop the financial bleeding, and you only have to do 10 shows. That's all. So he thought, well, I could do 10 shows. I'll do them every couple days, all in the same location in London, and I could get myself up for that. And then they said, well, listen, as long as you're doing 10, how about 50? And then as long as you're doing 50, how about this is kicking off a world tour? And he was so out of it, he said, okay, fine, and he signed all the papers. So this is what kicked in. And then they start rehearsing with him and realize this guy can't make it through a song, let alone a night, let alone 10 nights, let alone 50, let alone a world tour. He really isn't able. He's frail. He's lost his voice to a certain extent. He just doesn't have the power to dance. If you think he's going to be moonwalking like he did when he was at his prime, guess again. It would have been very akin to when Britney Spears opened the Grammy or the AMAs that time after she had gotten out of rehab and was still very, very, very troubled, very troubling performance, where she basically stood and looked at the camera and couldn't dance. She just froze on camera. It was the opening of the show. That's what the audience would have seen. That's what the people who were shooting the footage saw when, and then they went to AEG, the people who were financing this, and a whole series of emails went by, and they said, what are we going to do? He's out of it. Well, we've already committed to the dates. Make it happen. Make them eat. Give them a hamburger. So, they were well aware that he was a problem, and yet nobody said, he could die.
Now, this doctor that he has, he was a cardiologist. Was he qualified to be able to prescribe what he did prescribe?
Well, Dr. Murray was. I write a lot about his background too. He's just you almost have to just read it because it's so thick with intrigue about who this guy is. He did. And he had patients who came forward during the trial saying, "Oh, my God, he saved my life, and he's a wonderful guy." He had that side of him. He was a cardiologist in 3 states, Nevada, Texas, and California. He was born in Trinidad, so he has this kind of lilting, tropical voice, interesting voice. He's a huge guy. He has something like 7 children, or is it 9? I forget, from mostly different women. Wasn't able to pay his child support. Was being sued, and wages were attached, and his, he was in trouble. Plus, he had an addiction himself to strippers. So when Michael Michael made sure that part of his deal with AEG was that they pay $100,000 a month to a doctor of his choosing who would travel with him and be at his side, be right outside. When he's on stage, he could look over to the side and see Dr. Murray there with oxygen if he needed it, and Dr. Murray would be his second skin, just right outside the audience view. He'd be there, and Dr. Murray said, "I will be there. I'll be your best friend. I'll be there." But what Michael Jackson really wanted was propofol. So Murray said, "What? I don't even know what that is." He figured it out. He said, "Oh, that's very dangerous. How about this instead? Let me detox you." Well, Michael wasn't putting up with any of that. The paperwork was signed by AEG, but not by Michael Jackson. So Dr. Murray worked for something like 6 weeks without a penny. He never did make a cent from any of this. He was supposed to, but Michael never got around to signing the paperwork, so they never paid him. And he ended up ordering so much propofol because, as I described, it's in little vials about 3 or 4 inches long. Each of them lasts 15 minutes. Michael wanted him to put in the IV and sit at my bedside and let me get my 8 hours. So you add up how many vials is that per night, times the tour. So Dr. Murray had to get his hands on a boatload of propofol, which is not easy. So he basically let people in the pharmaceutical world think that he was opening a pharmacy. And he took possession of them at his apartment, which was somewhat near where Michael's mansion was. So he was getting all this stuff, which was unheard of. So, and there were also a lot of other drugs in Michael's system. When he died, he couldn't tell, if he was coming or going. His veins had all collapsed. It was very hard to find a place to inject him that wasn't collapsed from way too many injections. And he was just in pathetic state.
Wow. Now, we've heard about your involvement. What is Dr. Weck's involvement in the Michael Jackson case itself?
Well, there were many facets of this family, and the family had a lot of... Michael ended up having 3 autopsies. The one that the L.A. County coroner did, that was the main one, and then the family, different factions of the family wanted their own autopsy done. They wanted to take hair samples. They wanted to... it became really interesting as to one of the points in the trial was who had his fingerprints on the vials of propofol. And the doctor said, well, not me. I left to make a phone call to a stripper, by the way. And I was out of the room. Michael Jackson woke up, saw that I wasn't there, so he fed himself that final injection. So all sorts of things required another look at his body, another look at his fingerprints, another taking palm print samples, hair samples. So if you remember, there was a big delay from when he died on June 25th, 2009 to when he was buried.
Yes.
And even then, there were samples still in reserve that they had to go back and look at. At some point, somebody, an attorney representing Joe Jackson, who is the father, asked Dr. Wecht to take a look at all of this and to see if, who can we sue here? Can we sue AEG? Can we sue Dr. Murray? Is this all kosher? And Dr. Wecht said, are you kidding? This is not kosher. There's nothing that's reasonable with anything Dr. Murray did. He should lose his license in every state, and he should go to jail. This is nothing short but of negligence and if not homicide, manslaughter. So that was his involvement, and he never did testify because that case kind of got thrown out, or I don't know what happened with it. It just didn't ever get to court. But, that's kind of par for the course in that family. Sometimes they saber rattle and, hope that they can get up. Michael was paying his whole family all their expenses for everything. So everybody wanted to keep that gravy train going. And
sure.
As it became clear that his estate was being handled by people who weren't going to play that game, and quickly put it into the black ink rather than red, it clamped down on all the kind of crazy expenses of taking care of this enormous family. It all kind of righted itself. So Dr. Wecht ended up not testifying, and there was no court action for his part on it.
Now, what did you feel, because you've been covering the Michael Jackson case, but what did you really, as a conclusion, what did you see from that trial that was most disturbing, or the lack of trial, I should say?
Well, there was a trial of Dr. Murray, and I thought that was very interesting because which was televised, I believe, and I don't remember. I didn't go to the trial. It was one of the few that I didn't actually attend, and because it was just a zoo. But I watched enough coverage on television and the reporters who were in the room, and I read everything on the case. And in fact, I waited until that trial was finished before I finished the book. Same with Casey Anthony, which was going on kind of at the same time I was writing that portion of it. So it's up to the minute. The only thing that's happened in the interim is that Murray did get sentenced to 4 years. He served, our jails here are overcrowded. He served, I think, 2.5 years. He was paroled, and now he has an attorney to try to get an appeal and a retrial if necessary. He wants his case overturned so that he can get back his medical licenses and practice medicine again, and because he still has all these children to support. So I think he's not going to prevail on that. And if he had never met Michael Jackson, would he have been an adequate doctor? The court said yes, and he probably would have. He just was up against someone who he could not say no to, and he was too economically tied to this person to walk away. So that was a huge problem. Would that ever happen to Murray again? Well, I don't think so. But, let's not make him a doctor and see.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about the other chapters in From Crime Scene to Courtroom. The other chapters.
Well, we had Drew Peterson in there. Well, first of all, Casey Anthony was just, one of those that people just cannot get enough of that case. And Drew Peterson was a guy who was a SWAT team member in a suburb of Chicago, a real arrogant, kind of cocky guy whose third wife was found in a bathtub, and Dr. Wecht had a lot to do with this one. She was found drowned in her bathtub, and they buried her because he kind of controlled the coroner's inquest at the time. This goes back some years. And they basically said, it's Drew, come on, he wouldn't do anything. Oh, yeah, she had bruises, but, she was kind of a mess, and she bumped into stuff, and it's a sad drowning, and there are kids, so let Drew raise those kids, and that's it. So nothing ever happened with that. Her name's Kathleen Savio. And then his fourth wife went missing, and she was a young cupcake, and she's never been seen again. And her family and law enforcement started saying, wait a minute, what happened to her? And since we're wondering, what about this other wife? Because they start talking to the first two wives and say, hey, this guy has trouble with women. And meanwhile, he's arrogant. He's going on dating shows on the radio. He's on talking to Geraldo on TV, and he's just using his notoriety as a lady killer, accused lady killer, to his benefit to land more babes. So anyway, it covers that case, and he was convicted. They exhumed wife number 3 and found, yes, she had been murdered. And this is if anything ever happens with wife number 4 and they recover her bones, that'll be interesting. Drew, of course, says that she took off with, another guy, and, of course, there's no evidence of that. But it's kind of those, if he just shut his mouth, he probably wouldn't have been in the trouble he ended up in. And, they're just, all of our cases are just really interesting. There's also in book number 2, there's a case about Brian Jones, who was the original guitarist for the Rolling Stones.
Right.
He drowned in, I think, 1967 in a swimming pool in England. And the question is, was he murdered, or was it an accident or something in between? So we get into all of that. Dr. Wecht has looked at all the evidence, and I think that's a very surprising case, what the conclusions are in that. Very interesting. And all the possible suspects, I get into all of those, because I write the backgrounds of the stuff, and then Dr. Wecht analyzes the medical and legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other cases.
You also cover the case of Anna Nicole Smith as well.
Right, and her son. Dr. Wecht was first brought into this by Anna's boyfriend/lawyer, who said, hey, we're in Nassau, can you come and look at the autopsy, attend the autopsy of her son, because, he never did drugs, we don't know what happened. And so the world press was down there because Anna had just given birth 2-3 days before to her daughter, and she was still in the hospital suffering, and then her son comes to visit, and he winds up dead. And he was 20 years old. So Dr. Wecht goes to Nassau, helps with the autopsy, and it turns out, maybe you don't think your son did drugs, but you know what? Pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs, were all through that kid's system, and that means he's a drug addict. 3 months later, Anna Nicole herself died, and Dr. Wecht consulted on that case and had a lot to say about the official investigation. And we then, our book, which really looked at her medical and legal care, ended up getting 2 doctors and the attorney looked at by the California Boards of Medicine and Law, and who said maybe they shouldn't be practicing law and medicine, and they were all arrested. 2 of them were let go, and there was a conviction that stood on the psychiatrist. And again, it's these doctors who get too close to the patients, who are wealthy and fun and powerful and bring you to great premieres and help you with your fundraising for your charities and blah, blah, blah. And they just get enamored. They get, they lose their sense of borders and propriety. They just do. So that's a double case and very interesting. In our current book, Final Exams, there's a case that everybody in America followed very closely, and because I care a lot about child sexual assaults, every one of our books has one of those kinds of cases in it. And Final Exams has the case of Jessica Lunsford, who was a 9-year-old in Florida who was taken from her bed and, killed by a predator. And it covers the investigation and the aftermath about who was looked at by cops. Again, cops who didn't do things right. And then what happened in the media to the father, who went from being a suffering dad who didn't ask to be part of this to Mr. Champagne and cigars, and creating a foundation that he used to fatten his own wallet and buy fancy cars and bikes. And, it kind of covers the whole gamut there.
Yeah, incredible. And so you've co-authored 3 books with Dr. Wecht, and that's from A Question of Murder, From Crime Scene to Courtroom, and now Final Exams.
Right.
And
the last one is an ebook, soon to be a print on demand, and that one is on planetannrule.com, PLANETANNRULE.com. And your listeners, Dan, of all, know Ann Rule and her amazing team, who Ann has turned out more true crime books than anybody. I'm, in her, I'm among her many admirers. We're very happy to be a part of her publishing team. And our next book will also be for them, and it's on the Kennedy case, JFK, and it's called 50 Years of Lies. And Dr. Wecht has been on that case for 50 years. Actually, it'll be 50 years in September, because he, like most of America, thought, well, gee, the government's not lying about this. It's got what they said. Lee Harvey Oswald did this. And then he got the Warren Commission report, which came out in several months after, almost a year after the assassination, and he and some other esteemed experts started closely reviewing it and saying, this does not make sense, this is insane. And he has been one of the loudest voices for explaining the evidence and exposing the lies. And it's just permeated his entire career. And he just is, he's an amazing. When this book is out, we'd love to come on and talk about that.
Absolutely.
Because the things that are in this book will just blow your mind.
Well, absolutely. We're looking forward to that. When do you have any sort of estimated time that this might come out? When do you have a rough idea when it might?
I'm still writing it. I'm, a little more than halfway done, and it covers 50 years. So we get into it's a chronology, but it also sets the stage of who because not everybody has spent 50 years obsessing on this like he has and like I have, but it's written for young people to know what happened, who may not know anything about Kennedy, may not know the issues that were going on in America that led to his death. And so there's a lot of just basic history in there, too. And very, the research is just phenomenal. I have to say, it's really amazing.
Yeah, it's an incredible story that it just spans, like you say, 50 years, but also the entire history has to be taken into consideration because that's what it is. It's one of the biggest moments in the history of mankind. So
yeah, it's
we're
certainly
really going
a game changer. I mean, as I was a kid and saw that, and his accused assassin being killed 2 days later, that was the first time anyone in the world saw snuff film on television. And, that was just one of those things that you just don't forget. And so, then all the characters, you have to understand the framework before you understand who are the suspects, what are the motivations, where the avenues go. So it's a really big book. But Planet Animal has been wonderful to us.
Yes, and then it's a testament to that the queen of true crime, the biggest and most important figure in true crime, Anne Rule, has endorsed an incredible true crime, real life true crime tag team of you and Dr. Wecht, and again, handling one of the cases that Dr. Wecht happened to be involved with right from the beginning. Again, based on his outrage and his interest, but his outrage, basically, and being a lawyer and a forensic pathologist, being in the eye of the storm of these important cases, especially when it comes to miscarriages of justice. So it's incredible, and our audience and myself especially will look forward to 50 Years of Lies. I wanted to mention, too, while I have this time, it's that Audible has been the new sponsor for the program, and I wanted to just let our audience know that Audible is the leading name in downloadable audiobooks, and right now they have a 30-day free trial where people can pick the book of their desire from over 150,000 titles and growing, and enjoy the unique experience of Audible audiobooks for those people
it's AUDIBLE.
Pardon me?
AUDIBLE.com.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it's audible.com/truemurder, and tell them Dan sent you. And like I said, they have a 30-day free trial right now, and so you can pick the book that you like and experience the audiobooks for. If you haven't tried them already, it's an experience that goes beyond the ebook, the paperback book, the hardcover book, the entire experience. And for a lot of people that it's necessary, or they want to maximize their entertainment time, or they're visually impaired, or they're on the road with two hands on the wheel, and they have mobile devices, they can maximize their time commuting or just have a great experience having some of the finest narrators in the world read some of your favorite authors' books to you at your own leisure. So, and again, now that it's downloadable, it's very much like the ebook and the publish on demand. It just gives more access to great authors and their great works. So I want to urge people to go to audible.com/truemurder and experience digital audiobooks today. So thank you very much. And so I want to thank you very much, Donna, for coming on and with Dr. Wecht and recounting these amazing stories. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you very soon. And
we love doing your show, Dan, and that you have this incredible sponsor now. Well, I can't think of anyone who deserves that kind of recognition more. You've been doing this a while. You know the questions to ask the authors, and we really love playing the game at your high level. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Donna. Those are very, very kind words, and I love having yourself and Dr. Wecht on, because you guys are the real deal, the real crime fighters, the real serious people that are involved, and you roll up your sleeves and get to work. And there's a real, it's not just entertainment anymore. You guys are very, very involved in being important players in some of these cases, and and our audience will see that from this next book that comes up, especially 50 Years of Lies. You'll see the importance of this very special team that you and Dr. Wecht are, bringing your experience and your passion to the forefront. And I think that's what the audience is. I get emails all the time from all over the world, and people really want to be a participant in some of these things, to feel really involved, not just a bystander and listening to these stories. Some of these stories that you're talking about, where the passion comes through and that your involvement is very important, and I think that just another added element to the books that you offer, you and Dr. Wecht. So I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about From Crime Scene to Courtroom, and From a Question to Murder, and, of course, Final Exams. Thank you very much, Donna.
Thank you, Dan. All the best.
Have a good night, and hope to talk to you soon.
Good. All right. Bye.
Good night. Bye.